Hello everyone, welcome to the third video, well actually I think it's the fourth video, but it's number 3 in the sequence, on Swift programming. Today we will go over functions, something that is very important in the Swift language and of course to programming as a whole. I'm going to walk through sort of 3 or 4 main phases of learning functions with the different things you can do in them. But really quickly, I'd like to start off with why we need to write this. If you already know why, feel free to click here and skip to a later timestamp. So why do we need functions? Well, let's say I'm trying to write a program that prints hello and then a name. So for example, we'll print hello and then Gandalf. And then we'll print hello and then me, and then hello and then Frodo, and then hello and then Sam. I don't know however many Lord of the Rings characters there are, but this kind of gets tedious. And it gets even worse when I try to, let's say I change my mind and I want to say goodbye to everyone. I can be very clever and use the trick from the last video, which I hold down the Option key and then drag like this, and I can change these all to goodbye. But that's not great if I have like 30 lines of code between each of these calls and I have to start searching everywhere, and it's a nightmare. And so functions are a way to solve this problem. I can put the behavior for printing a single name in one place, and then everywhere else I can just call it and say, hey, I want to do that, but with this name, and I can keep passing in different name parameters. So let's just start off with a really basic function to work with. So what do we want to do? We want to print hello, and then like the name. So this is how you declare a function in Swift. You type func, and then a space, followed by what you want the function to be called. In this case, we are saying hello, so I will just type say hello. And then we put 2 parentheses, open brace, and press enter. Xcode will automatically create the closing brace for us and indent us actually 1 block, which you can do by pressing tab, or if you're a heathen, you can press 4 spaces. But I like to do tab because it's easier. A couple things to note here. Func always has to be lowercase, but say hello, this is a matter of convention. You could use, this is called camel case, where you have the first one lowercase and then every other word is uppercase. You could also do something called snake case, which is when you have an underscore and then a lowercase letter, but this is mainly for lower level languages, so we're not just going to do the uppercase version. That's just my style. All right, so within this block of code, within this function scope, as it were, we are going to type what we want to print. We'll do print hello Peter. Now, if I run the code by pressing Command R, you will see that nothing will happen because we've defined the code to be run, but we haven't actually called it. We said to the program, hey, this is where the code is that we want to execute, and the program's like, okay. But we never tell it to actually do anything with it. So below here, we need to type say hello, just like that. And now the program, when it gets to this line, is like, oh, I know where that code is. That code is up here. And then it just starts running through. Note that in the current way we're building functions like this, we're not doing them inside of anywhere, we're just making them in the file. You do need to call the function after you define it. Try putting it before and see what happens. One thing I like doing is breaking. You know what, we'll just do it now. So if we do this beforehand and try to run this, Xcode gives us an error and it says, hey, use of unresolved identifier say hello, because, well, we haven't defined it until after we use it. We need to put it after it like that. All right, and now if we run our code, we will see that it prints hello Peter. Cool. So this is the function we just wrote, but now it is in a very pretty presentation mode. And let's actually look again what we've done. So at the top, we put our function name in camel case, and inside of the function in the block, we just put the stuff for the function. And of course, we can create variables in here and we can do all sorts of stuff, but we'll get into that very soon. So let's move on to the next phase of functions. So this is like, okay, I'll decrease this and I'll write, this is phase 1. What is phase 2? Well, let's say we want to say hello to a very specific person, and we don't want to keep changing the person inside of the function every time. Let's say I have a name variable, and we'll just call this name. So like let name equal Gandalf. And I want to use this name. I don't want to use, the one inside the function. And so the way we do this is, well, let's start writing the code, and I'll explain after. So we type func, say hello, and we should give this a different name. Swift can kind of figure it out, but we'll just give it a different name. We'll just say hello too. And this is how we write a parameter for a function in Swift. It's a little strange, I'll give you that. In Java, this is backwards. You do string name, but in Swift, you do name string. If you think back to our, I think it was episode 2, when we define types, you'll notice that this is actually the same exact syntax, but we're just chopping off the beginning and end bits. But unfortunately, unlike variables, Swift does need to know the type of every parameter in a function. And we'll get into this in about, I don't know what episode, maybe 6 or 7 when we start talking about classes and structs, because there's actually a very good reason for it. So now that we have this name parameter to play around with, that was a lot of P's, we will print it. So we will do print and then name, name, and we will use our string interpolation trick with the backslash and 2 parentheses to print out name. Now, I want to point out something here, that this name inside of our function is not the same name as this name that is outside of our function. Notice that when I hover my cursor over say hello, Xcode highlights the say hello up here because it knows that those are the same thing. But when I put my cursor on this name, it only highlights the parameter and not the variable outside. This is an extremely important concept in programming called scope. Whereas inside the function, if we rename any variables like this, it takes over. And so within this scope, from this brace to this brace, okay, Xcode, thanks for highlighting the other one, from the top brace to the bottom brace, this name is the king. This is the one that's valid. This is a kind of confusing concept in programming because you might say, hey, well, I can't reuse that variable name again. You absolutely can, because when you define blocks of code like this, everything gets thrown out. Now, there is a technical reason for why this works and how this works, which I might go into in like a bonus episode. Comment below if you want to actually dig into the details of how programming languages actually maintain scope. It's very, very cool. All right, so now if we run our code, now that we've written it, we realize that, hey, I made the same mistake as before. We actually need to call it. So I'm going to move my name variable back down below the function just to keep it all in one place now that I've demonstrated that thing. And then below our first say hello, I'm going to type say hello too. Notice that Xcode gives us an autocomplete. I can just press enter and I will type our name. Well, that's strange. Our name parameter up here has mysteriously shown up at the bottom here again, and now it's very confusing. What's going on? Unlike
Java,
Swift has named parameters for functions. So in most languages, you would just pass it in like this. You would just pass in the variable you're using, and if you're calling the function, you would have to look up the documentation, or you'd have to dig into where the function was defined. But Swift makes us write the parameter name here. So if we're brand new to writing this function, we can just figure out what it does. This seems kind of silly for like a 1 parameter function. Like obviously I'm going to pass in the name parameter. It says it right here. But let's say you have about 7,000 lines of code and 52 different functions, and now you really want your named parameters. There is a way to get around this, but I will go into that momentarily. For now, if we run our code, we can see that it now prints hello Gandalf. All right, so let's quickly review. We have our function say hello that accepts a name parameter of type string, and it prints out hello name. So we have our parameter name, our parameter type, and note, as before, name is only valid inside the function, and this allows for what I like to call context-dependent variables. I don't have to rename this parameter name2, and then some other programmer needs to figure out why the hell it's named name2. They can just look at it as name, and it's just name. Let's get into phase 3. So I will move the code around a little bit with the spacing. I'm very picky about spacing. And then I will just phase 3. Well, we're going to do something special in phase 3. We are going to return this string instead of printing it. We are not going to say hello. In fact, we are going to func make greeting because we are no longer saying something. And we will still accept our name parameter as before. But this time, we are returning a string. Note that the return parameter, the return type, is just a type. We don't have a name associated with it because, well, you'll see in a moment. As you can see, Xcode is already screaming at me. It loves me so much. We need to actually return something. In this case, I will return. Well, we have a couple options here. I could do it the normal programming way, which is hello and then plus name. This is called string concatenation if you want to show off to some friends, or if you're like me and have no friends, you can just simply call this adding strings. We can also do this another way too, where we use our same string interpolation trick, where I just do the backslash parentheses and type name. And this will actually work just fine. I prefer the concatenation way because, well, that's just how I do things, but you can do this way too. I'm just going to rewrite it back. Always good to have options. So now if I go down here and I call make greeting, and this time our name will be, I don't know, we'll do Frodo. We'll keep with the theme here. Press Command R to run. Once again, for the third time in a row, I've been bested by my programming ability, or lack thereof. We have not used our return type, and Xcode tells us as much. It says, hey, you made a call to make greeting that you didn't use what it gave you back. You are like a greedy person. And so we need to not be greedy people, and we need to save this somewhere. We're going to save it to a variable. So we're going to do let greeting equal make greeting. Good so far, no warning. But now we actually need to use it. So I will type print greeting. And if we run our code, we can finally see that we have printed hello Frodo. Cool. Now, before we move on, there's one small trick I would like to show here. Swift actually has not just one type of named parameters, but two types of named parameters, whereby we can do something like this.
NANI?
Well, I'm going to quickly see that Xcode has given us something down here. It says incorrect argument label and call have been expected with name. If I click this, it will actually give me an option to fix it.
I wish my life had a fix button. I wish my life had a
fix it. And normally I don't advise just blindly clicking this, but if we do fix, we can see that our name parameter has disappeared. But it's not disappeared from within the function. We still have it within the function. So Swift has this concept of internal parameter names and external parameter name, or I should call it internal labels and external labels. Our internal label is the word name. And you know, this code makes sense. Hello plus name. But now outside, look at this. Make greeting with name Frodo. Isn't that pretty cool? I think it's pretty cool. I think it's cool that we can have code that inside of where you're defining it, it reads like, you know, a person writing the code would write it. But when you're using it, it reads like someone who's using the function would use it. Like let greeting equal make greeting with name Frodo instead of just name Frodo, which is kind of robotic. I will just do, whoops, I messed it up. We'll do with name. There we go. Xcode gives me some little help there. Cool. And if we run this, we'll see it runs exactly the same as before. If you don't want to use a parameter name and you are an old school programmer who hates change, you can just type an underscore here. That is the way we ignore things. So in that case, Xcode even updates and says, hey, you have an extra label argument here. I will gladly remove it. So now we just have make greeting Frodo. I would strongly recommend you make use of these external parameter names because they're actually extremely useful when you're writing code with, I mean, think about it. Imagine if you have like 6 different parameters. You'd have to constantly check back to somewhere else to figure out what all of those parameters do. In this case, Xcode would just label them all for you, and it makes the code very easy to read. So let's head back to the super secret keynote presentation and take a look at the function we just wrote. So we have our function called make greeting. There's my cursor, with name and then name, which is a type string, and it returns a type string in which we return hello, comma space, and then we add the name that we pass in. We can then call the function called make greeting with name Peter in this case, and we can save it to a variable called greeting, which is a let because we're not modifying it. So remember, we have our external name and our internal name. This is just how I think about it. We have our external first and then our internal after. And this allows for, as I said before, sentence-like code. So I don't know how long this video is, but it is almost certainly over 15 minutes at this point. So I will just mention 2 things very quickly. The first thing is that you can, of course, have multiple parameters here. So I'm going to put my label argument back here. And of course, let's say you want to say hello to 2 people. You can just put comma space, and then I will call this like name2. And this is a string. And then I can do plus name, plus, and then, okay, this is going to get a little messy. Let's go back to the string interpolation way of doing things. We'll have hello, and then name, and then and name2. And then, of course, we need to pass our parameter down here. So let's say Frodo and Sam, because those are good friends. And we will, of course, update our, because we didn't type our underscore here. So I'm going to type this as and name. And then we add it down here, and name. And we need our colon, of course. So this has complicated our function definition quite long, quite severely. Make greeting with name, string, and name, but it makes the call very nice to read. I know it's quite overwhelming initially, but it works. It says, hello, Frodo and Sam. This thing just takes kind of getting used to, of course. The more you write Swift code and the more you write functions, this will just start to make a lot more sense. It may seem weird and contrived and verbose and extraperfluous and other things, but trust me, everything's got a reason. The final thing, of course, is I would not be a good tutorial person if I didn't give an exercise to do. So of course, we have an exercise. Make a function called add that adds two ints, num1 and num2, and returns the new number. So we have a use case here. For example, our function is called add, and we have num1, which is 3, num2, which is 3, and it prints the result, which is 6. There's the link to the solution in the description below, but I would highly suggest, figure it out yourself. Really try to figure it out. If you get stuck, use Google. Don't go to the comments section first. Try to get comfortable using Stack Overflow, because trust me, you will use that more than any other website you currently do as you start programming more and more. And that concludes today's video. Thanks for watching. Next week, I will go over my favorite code editor application, which is not Xcode. Ooh. I'm a nomad.